We're going to start in the interest of time. Hopefully, Tim Peck will be joining us shortly. He confirmed that he's going to be here. Maybe one of the topics of conversation will be traffic and parking. My name is Michael Hamburger. On behalf of our group, Concerned Scientists at IU, I'm really pleased to welcome everybody to our Candidates Forum on Science, Technology, and the Environment. A special welcome to our 4 and hopefully soon 5 candidates to be here. Our audience here, we have a live streaming audience, maybe both on YouTube and on VCAT. So thank you all of you for joining us. I want to say a word quickly about Concerned Scientists at IU for those who don't know about it. We are a nonpartisan campus and community coalition started by IU faculty, staff, and students in 2017 in response to threats to the scientific mission of our research world. We've grown to over 1,000 members. We sponsor a whole variety of community and campus events, speakers, and activities, legislative action, regular weekly news digest, educational programs, and I'm going to be pleased in a second to introduce our student group, Advocates for Science at IU, who've been very active the last couple of years. If you haven't done so yet, on your way out, please join our CSIU mailing list and you can hear about upcoming events. I want to make a few important acknowledgments to our, in addition to Advocates for Science at IU, we have 3 community co-sponsors: Citizens Climate Lobby of South Central Indiana, the Green Sanctuary Task Force of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Bloomington, and the League of Women Voters of Bloomington, Monroe County. And also a big thank you to the library staff and BCAT for setting up this beautiful venue. How about a little round of applause? I believe this is the 3rd candidate forum that we've sponsored, focusing specifically on science and science policy. And we claim, until proved otherwise, that this is the first ever in the country with that kind of specific focus. We've invited all of the candidates for the 9th congressional district election to join us today. And 4 of them are here today. Jim Graham, Brad Meyer, Tim Peck hopefully will be joining us, Kyle Rourke, and Floyd Taylor. And we did invite our incumbent representative, Erin Houchin. She declined, but all of the candidates will be invited to submit written answers to questions following the forum, and she and others will have a chance to respond. I do have an important request for all of us. This is kind of an old-fashioned exercise in civil discourse, so let's be sure to show how well it can work. Let's everybody just be nice to one another, just be nice to the audience, be nice to the candidates, to one another, and to our student moderators. And I think we have to be cognizant of time, including myself. We have a short window here because the library, thanks to budget cuts, now closes at 7 p.m. sharp. So we're going to get everybody. I'm supposed to be out?
No. I tell everybody to turn their phones off.
Oh, thank you. I thought there was a sign I should get off. Okay. Yes, silence your damn phones. And an important reminder, one of the things that we regretted about squeezing it in before 7 o'clock is that we won't have time for that informal conversation. So we are inviting all of you and our candidates to join us afterwards in the upstairs at Lenny's Brew Pub, just out to the left, down the street. The beers are on your own, but a good chance for conversation with our candidates if they're available. So please join us afterwards. So I think that's it for now. Without further ado, let me ask our student moderators, Emma Broach and Tyler Morris, to introduce themselves, say a little bit about Advocates for Science at IU, and get us started with the forum. Emma, take it away.
Hi, everybody. My name's Emma Broach, and I'm a sophomore like you. I'm majoring in journalism and environmental and sustainability studies. And myself and Tyler and Adela and a few other people around here all lead the student affiliate organization, Advocates for Science at IU. We work with CSIU in all of our events, but we also do some student-centered things. But we're here today to co-sponsor, and Tyler and I are going to be in charge of asking all of the questions and introducing all of the structure today. So I wanted to talk about how today is going to work. First, we're going to allow all the candidates to give 1-minute introductions about themselves. Then we're going to have a general questions section that with questions that we prepared. It's going to be 4 questions, and each candidate gets 2 minutes to answer each question. These questions were provided to the candidates in advance so they could kind of think through them ahead of time. But after this general questions section, we're going to have a lightning round section. This is going to be 4 to 5 questions that are a little bit more yes or no type answers, and the candidates were not provided these in advance. And then after that, we're going to have time for a few audience questions. We apologize, we're going to have to limit that number to probably only 3 or 4 questions depending on our timing. Candidates will also have about 45 seconds to respond to those. And unfortunately, to anybody who's joining on the live stream, we will not have time to answer any live stream questions. But yeah, that's the kind of the general structure. And now Tyler can introduce himself and talk about audience questions and how that's going to work.
Hi everyone, I'm Tyler Morris. I'm a senior nutrition science student on the pre-med track here at AU. As Emma mentioned, I'm one of the co-presidents along with her and a few others, and I'll be co-moderating today. So just one thing I wanted to mention real quick about the general questions. Those will be the first 4 questions. Candidates are going to have 2 minutes to answer those. I'm going to hold up a little 30-second time sheet to let you know you have 30 seconds left. So just look for me over there while you're doing that. Then we'll have to cut you guys off at 2 minutes to keep things going. And then, yeah, after the general questions, as I mentioned, we'll go into the lightning round questions. And then after that, hopefully we have time for about 3 or 4 audience questions. And Adela over there, one of our co-presidents, she will cards from you guys if you guys have questions. And then, yeah, after that, we'll have closing statements from candidates, and that'll be it.
Yeah, if you want an index card, you didn't already grab one, just raise your hand, flag on Adela, and she can come give you an index card. You can write your question and then have them to her throughout the middle of the lightning round. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to allow all the candidates to introduce themselves. So whoever wants to start first.
I'll start. Hi, is my mic on?
No.
A little closer to it, maybe.
Hi,
Yeah.
okay. So I'm Jim Graham, Democratic candidate for Congress in the 9th District. I grew up here in Monroe County, and I actually attended a high school science summer institute at IU. After my junior year at Edgewood, I studied engineering at Rose-Hulman and worked for General Motors for some years. I did graduate study at that university up in West Lafayette. And then I taught engineering at Purdue Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and Speed School at the University of Louisville, where I was a department chair for 7 years. As I got close to retirement, I got together with some of my colleagues and tried to commercialize some of the in cybersecurity and started a tech startup company, and I served as CEO for 7 years. As a science person my entire life, I've always felt that we should use rational analysis for problem solving. That's why I'm so dismayed by what's happened in this country for the past 25 years. The anti-science misinformation and disinformation that has flooded the internet, in my opinion, now threatens to slow or even reverse a lot of the science-based progress made since World War II. I hope we can talk a little bit about that tonight, why science is not held in the same high regard it was back in the 60s. I look forward to this discussion today, answering some questions, and I look forward to a lively debate.
Hi, I'm Brad Meyer. Thank you all for being here tonight. So I'm an electrical engineer, or most of us are electrical engineers. So I'm a user of science and certainly appreciate it. Science is under attack. This administration is purging science like 10,000% from decision making. The proposed science cuts are historic. NIH is 40%, NASA's 47%, NSF is 58%. Thousands of grants have been delayed, frozen, or terminated due to structural changes that they've made to undercut science. This is how we're losing science capacity, and we're going to lose talent. But the same things are happening here at IU, where they're increasing centralization of decision-making, political power is overtaking university governance, and suppression of free speech is coming through, what they did with Dunn Meadow and then the Indiana Daily Student. Congress has the authority to stop all of this, but right now our Congresswoman is rubber stamping everything that goes through. The Union of Concerned Scientists is critical because they defend accuracy, bridge expertise to policy, and engage the public with evidence. That work matters because facts require defenders. I'm asking for your vote on May 5th to be that defender in Washington. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kyle Ward, and I'm a former assembly line mechanic, UAW, and lead officer, and electrical engineer as well, licensed electrical engineering. I actually took the exam while I was in the Navy. And so when you take the exam, you're legally responsible to, indicate that on any type of advertisements relative to consulting. But regarding that, I've had a broad experience at Chrysler, Cummins, Rolls-Royce, and at Ford, doing design and development work all the way from a mechanic perspective, all the way through design and development, reliability, quality, releasing, and taking into account the voice of the customer and what requires there. So I have a broad experience from that. I also taught at Ivy Tech for 3 or so years. So I understand what it takes to take a technology and teach it and have folks use it out in the real world so they can get a good paying job. My background is, I came here, got married into the state in '95. My first wife's from Jackson County. And I've been raising my 4 children here since then, pretty much, since basically '07. And deeply worried about this country relative to disinformation and the fact that we don't follow the truth anymore. What facts are and what, you hear a lot about alternative facts. That's discouraging. That's very disheartening because facts are facts. There is no alternative facts. And while I'm one of those evidence-based type folks, I want to follow the data where it goes, where it lies. And I support that, from a public policy standpoint and from a STEM perspective. When I was in the Navy, from an educational standpoint, I did notice that a lot of our folks coming into the Navy just trying to get STEM type roles, whether it's to be a mechanic or electrician, they were really struggling with mathematics. And so we need, from a public policy standpoint, to look at solutions that provide folks to get into the STEM communities pretty easily, because we need STEM professionals. I've read an article just recently, we're falling behind. A lot of folks are retiring, and we need to backfill those roles. So appreciate your vote. My name is Kyle Work of kylework.com, and appreciate your vote. Thank you.
I'm Floyd Taylor. And while I'm not a career scientist, I have deep respect for the scientific method. And I've spent my entire career in technical fields. I've worked as a chemistry lab technician, managed hazardous waste treatment, and run a wastewater treatment plant. Jobs where evidence and procedure are paramount. I'm a platinum sponsor of the American Association for the Advancement of Science because I believe in supporting robust independent research. I'm ready to bring that same evidence-based approach to government. And in all seriousness, as we tackle these complex issues, it's good to keep perspective and remember the immortal words of Socrates, who said, "I drank what?"
Thank you all for introducing yourselves. One other thing I wanted to note before we get started is that since we have such limited time, each of you only has 2 minutes to respond to these questions. So there's not much time for a response to the other candidates unless you want to use some of those 2 minutes to respond to another candidate. But kind of our goal here was to be educational. So yeah, take that as you will. All right, now we can get started with general questions. You guys can go in whatever order you want. And a reminder, it's 2 minutes answers per question. Number 1, Over the last 2 years, a combination of executive actions, personnel losses, and funding decisions have deeply impacted academic and government research institutions. What congressional actions would you support to help restore U.S. leadership in scientific research?
I'll start again. We might as well just go down the line every time. No? Oh, yeah. Got to be really close to this mic. The bottom line is we're killing the goose that laid the golden egg. Basic research done at places like IU has driven the American economy since World War II and made us the envy of the world.
Sorry, the microphones are not on. I don't know who's doing it, but yeah.
Test.
Yeah, it's helping. Okay, so let's just try this. I was a university professor for 30+ years. Can you hear me in the back? Good. All right. So the bottom line is we're killing the goose that laid the golden egg. Basic research done at places like Indiana University and that place up in West Lafayette have driven our economy since World War II. And we made us the envy of the world. Now, obviously, the Trump administration, as Brad pointed out, definitely is hostile to science. In the FY 2026 budget, he suggested a 57% cut to NSF, 40% cut to NIH. The good news is the Congress didn't do that. They basically left NSF flat, gave a small increase to NIH. But basically those same numbers are back for next year's budget. So we'll have to see what happens there. In addition, as pointed out, there have been many of the leaders of NSF and NIH have been forced to resign. Either they've resigned or they just had so much pressure. Some of them actually been fired. As Brad pointed out, also there have been unconstitutional sequesters of research money that was allocated, and the administration, no, you can't have this unless you do this or unless you do that. Okay. So now let's talk about reality for a minute. Congress appears to think more of science than the president does. That's good. I think we have to be realistic how much we can do as a newly elected congressman. The next 2 years is going to be a war. Let me tell you, we're going to be playing defense for everything that's decent and good about this country. And science is no exception. Thank you.
Mic check. Up. All right, here we go.
Yeah, over there.
Say again.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So, as I mentioned, propose the science cuts 40%, NIH, NASA 47, NSF 57, and then the Department of Energy between 15 and 50%. And they're undercutting the basics of funding, but they're also doing things like interference in competitive grant review, centralized control of funding, and program prioritization based on, there we go, bingo, thank you, based on political criteria. This is undercutting our ability to do research, and it's also undercutting the ability for people to speak freely. Now we've fallen off the other side of the horse, as the Hungarians would say. All right. Sorry. So there's a wide variety of organizations or different mechanisms like the CIBR and CITR and EPSCoR and DARPA and Small Business Administration that all play together in this. And basically, if they cut the funding, there isn't going to be anywhere to put that. And research is hugely important. And the big thing that I'm concerned about is freedom of expression and the ability for people to speak the truth. I don't know where I am in time because of the interruptions, but the difference between a good idea and a dumb idea, it's actually the same. It starts out with one person believing it, And science is the way we figure out which is a good idea and which is a dumb idea. And we can't turn away from that.
Can you go ahead and have Mr. Mason introduce yourself as well?
Well, I'll just take the opportunity. Thank you so much. So I'm Tim Peck. I'm a physician and ER doctor in Southern Indiana. I'm so sorry that I was a bit late here, had some travel difficulties. I was chief resident at the Harvard Program for Emergency Medicine, did some genomic research, published in the New England Journal of Medicine. I've had a number of health tech companies and invented telemedicine technology. So that's my credentials in terms of this particular forum. But maybe most importantly, I've spent years by the bedside as an emergency physician with increasingly skeptical public. What I've learned treating those people is this. We know how to develop new science and technology. That's not the problem, although it is under great pressure and we need to fight to protect it. But the deeper challenge is helping people understand it, trust it, see how it applies to their farms and their jobs and their food and their health and their freedoms. And because if people don't trust science, they won't use it. And if they don't use it, it doesn't matter how good the science and technology is. So I'm running to be a leader to bridge that gap, to bridge the gap between facts and beliefs, and make sure that all of our work as scientists is trusted again. In terms of this question, I'll be very brief, but the basics here is that we need to move back to peer review and from political appointees, and back to evidence away from politics, and that our academic research and our academic freedoms and our institutional independence should be tied to federal funding. If we want to give out federal funding, we need to make sure our systems, our schools, are allowing us to be free to make the decisions we need as academicians. And so through that, we can restore some trust and leadership. Thank you so much.
Okay. Testing. Oh, excellent. Okay, so, my first step would be to obviously reinstitute the funding cuts, for any and all science programs, DOE, CIA, NSA, and the like. I mean, that's step one. Two, we need to fire all the appointees, obviously. If you don't have a science background, okay, so let's start with the Secretary of Navy, who has an investment banking background. I bet $1 million he's never been on a carrier in his life. But yet he's managing the Department of Secretary of the Department of Navy, right? So we need to start with that. Let's put people who have the electrical engineering, math, science background in those roles. And then secondly, we don't talk a whole lot about patents and copyrights. I have some friends of mine at the patent office. They need patent agents like no tomorrow. I mean, it takes probably a year and a half to 2 years to get a patent through. And it's getting worse and worse and worse. We need to pay patent agents more money to keep people, and we also need to fully fund them to encourage innovation, right? Because patents don't flow, innovation doesn't occur, and if innovation doesn't occur, you don't have a good economy, and companies want to invest and create jobs. And that's what I'm all about, is creating jobs and opportunities for our people here in the district. So from a funding perspective, yes, obviously I would return any and all funding cuts back to the normal, basically buying levels. But also, we have to get back to science as facts, not alternative facts, no misinformation. And I'll be an advocate for that. I'm a licensed electrical engineer. I'm obligated to stick to the facts wherever it goes. And that would be my policy position and my approach as a U.S. congressional representative. Thank you.
Over the past 2 years, we've seen alarming erosion of our scientific infrastructure. I would support several key congressional actions First, fully funding the CHIPS and Science Act to restore our research capacity. Second, establishing protected research funding streams that can't be diverted for political purposes. Third, creating a congressional science office similar to the Office of Technology Assessment to provide lawmakers with nonpartisan scientific analysis. Fourth, strengthening protections for government scientists from political interference. Fifth, expanding the grant programs based through NSF, NIH, and DOE with particular focus on early career researchers who have been disproportionately affected by funding instability. These actions would help restore our global leadership while ensuring science remains independent and robust.
Thank you all. Our second question is about health policy. Health policy decisions at the state and federal levels have deeply impacted healthcare in our district. Among them are Medicaid funding cutbacks, changes to vaccine and public health policy, and limitations on government and academic research labs. With this as context, what congressional actions would you support to strengthen public health in our country?
I'm going to start with an accusation that Robert Kennedy Jr. is a crackpot and a charlatan.
Amen.
Yeah, and Brad can add to that. What an insult to American science to have a person who doubts basic vaccine science as the leader of our health policy in this country. As a result, there's been lots of key turnover and key resignations at the National Institute of Health, replacing highly qualified career world-renowned scientists with marginally qualified hacks who support RFK's crackpot views. Sad. Again, I'm going to be the guy I think that does the reality check every time. It's going to be very hard to undo the damage in a single Congress. I think that we can personally probably put together impeachment in cases against other agency heads. I'm not so sure if that'll work for RFK. Maybe he'll say something that insults Trump and he'll get fired. That's probably our best hope. But regardless, like in the case of NSF, we have to fight against politicization of funding for health research and basically get back to the science. Thank you.
I try to keep a quota that I don't agree with Dr. Peck more than twice in any of these debates. And we're using one early, and that is, he made an important point, which is we need to help people get trust in medicine, trust in science back. If we don't have people that trust these results, then we can't make progress anywhere. On the issue specifically of healthcare, I'm advocating for Medicare for all. So everybody gets covered, universal healthcare, and we need to fight for that. There are things that we need to do. We need to stabilize hospitals, and we need to make sure that people don't go bankrupt while we're in the process of transitioning, because that's what's happening right now. But Jim also mentioned, from the big picture, aside from healthcare at the ground level, the NIH and what they're doing there is a travesty, and Congress needs to provide tighter oversight, and they need to have hearings, and they need to get these people kicked out. They should have done their job and never allowed these people into leadership positions. One of the things you're going to hear a lot of people say, not me, is we can't do much. It's going to be hard, and we're going to have a razor thin majority. And you know what? The Republicans have a razor thin majority in the House and the Senate. And while we're wringing our hands saying we're not going to be able to do much with a razor thin majority, they are checking things off their list on Project 2025. So we've got to fight for this. Thank you.
This is about trust, 1,000%. And there's two pieces where trust has been violated well before this current administration, by our Congress, by our leaders, no matter what party they're in. First of all, it is too expensive to work in this country. And a lot of that has to do with the money that you pay for healthcare. And that has been ignored by our Congress. They haven't been able to work together to solve that. It's also about shared decision-making. As a physician, do a lot of that with my patients. And, you know, we don't just say that vaccines are fine. Vaccines hurt people sometimes. Sometimes. They help a whole lot more people. But if we don't communicate the ups and the downs, we don't get truthful about things, it's really hard to talk to people when they don't trust you. And I see that by the bedside, and I've seen that in Congress, and I think that's why we've gotten, those two reasons are why we got to the point that we have the leadership that we do. And Congress has abdicated its role of oversight of the executive branch. And some things we need to do are codify our vaccine advisory group. Congress can do that. The executive branch just wiped it out without Congress saying a word. We need to invest in local public health. So federal dollars from, we think about the NIH, the FDA, et cetera, that money needs to go down to the local places where people are actually talking to their local neighbors about the bird flu and how it actually affects them. And then finally, loan repayments of our scientists and our physicians and health workers to be in rural areas. Because if your hospital is gone, your only scientists in your community are gone if you live in a community like I do, farming community like I do. We need to invest in the people who will invest in those communities. Thank you.
Okay, so first step is I would advocate for ACA subsidies to be reinstated. That's reality. I think we can actually do that. The next step is I would advocate for a universal healthcare policy like Kentucky or Maryland, where you keep your private insurance, but at the same time you have a supplemental policy that could help deal with catastrophic issues. And that primarily would be for folks who are 250% of the poverty line, which is about $78,000 a year. And one of my issues with that is we need to have choice, and we do have a doctor scarcity here. So if we go down the path of Medicare for all, the question is how are we going to come up with all the doctors to deal with Medicare for all? So that's the issue. So that's my issue with Medicare for all. I mean, in a perfect world, yes, I think it would work, but the question is how do we pay for it? How do we get it through? And then the last thing, prevention. I've had the privilege of working for a number of different companies, Ford, Rolls-Royce, and the like. And they actually give you, if you get a medical exam, you get an echocardiogram, you get a dental checkup once a year, right? They give you $500. So they give you $1,000 off your healthcare bill. That, I'm very interested in that because when somebody starts throwing money at me to go get a doctor check, I'm very interested in that. I don't know about you all, but I have. If somebody says, I'm going to give you an extra $1,500 off your healthcare costs, now you have my attention just to go get a dental exam. So I'm very interested in policies around providing private insurance or healthcare policies, tax credit. You get a tax credit off your 2025 or 26 return. That I think that's a very popular program. I actually have that now. And then lastly, something that's free. It's just standard stuff. Eating healthy, exercise, and getting good sleep. That's free. We can do that right now without costing anything. All right, thank you.
The current state of national health policy concerns me deeply. We need to strengthen HHS by insulating it from political interference and restoring evidence-based decision-making. I would support expanding NIH funding for both basic and applied research, particularly in emerging health threats. We need to modernize our public health data infrastructure and ensure CDC can conduct research without political constraints. I'd also support legislation to address health disparities through targeted research funding and community-based implementation studies. Additionally, we must strengthen our pandemic preparedness by establishing permanent funding streams for research on emerging pathogens and vaccine development platforms. Public research and implementation should be bipartisan priorities, not political footballs.
Thank you. This third question is kind of two parts. What do you see as the proper role of the federal government in protecting air and water quality, and how should environmental protections be balanced against compliance costs and economic development? And what do you see as the proper role of the legislative and executive branches in creating and enforcing these environmental regulations?
Okay, I'm going to use a few seconds to rebut something that was said earlier about how the Republicans have been able to pass things through the Congress with narrow margins. You forget the little fact that they have a Republican president who's been signing those. If you think that Vance, Trump or Vance, as the case may be, will sign things passed by a narrow Democratic majority in the next 2 years, I have some swampland and Salt Creek that'll sell you, okay? It's just not going to happen. So we have to be realistic. We'll try. All five of us here will try to get things changed in the Congress. I just don't want to oversell expectations. Returning to the question, in the late 1960s, the damage of pollution was so evident, we can think of Los Angeles smog or burning rivers, that it led to the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. Unfortunately, they did such a good job that people today, a lot of people weren't born when that was the situation. They don't understand what's happening with the invisible pollution that comes out of factories and carbon dioxide and so forth. The big polluters have tried very hard to neuter the EPA for years, and they finally got the right administration in place to do that. I would try very, very hard to restore funding to the EPA and limit political influence. Again, it's going to be difficult. We'll try. Thank you.
Test.
Yeah, that's not.
Okay. All right, we'll go again. So first of all, Jim stole my lead line, so I'm going to have to check that one off. A river did catch on fire, and that is in fact why we got the Clean Water Act pushed through. But today, Indiana has some of the worst rivers in the United States. There's a lot of places you can't fish and actually eat the fish. But it's always in our peripheral vision. We're always so focused on, hey, it's the economy that we get so focused over here about jobs that we forget about. We need a place to live, right? So the role of the government is to ensure, in the simplest instance, the reason that businesses pollute is it's more expensive to do it right and be responsible. So they move that cost off of their books onto our backs and into our water and into our air. And that is unacceptable. The government's responsibility is to ensure that they don't do this, ensure that they have a plan to act responsibly, and ensure that they monitor to make sure that they're actually following through on their plan. That's the responsibility of the EPA, and that's why they're being undercut. Quick thing, one of the other things as we're responding across doctor shortages, what they're really saying is we don't have enough doctors to take care of everybody right now. That is something Congress needs to worry about, whether it's universal health care or regular insurance. We don't have enough doctors to care for everybody. That is a real problem that has to be addressed. It has nothing to do with what our healthcare system is. We've got a shortage.
So our government has aligned itself with corporations much more than people. And I'm not sure about the others at this table, but I've sworn off corporate PAC money, and we need to get money out of politics, or this climate emergency we're in does not change. We have to shift to clean energy. We have to shift to making sure that our air quality is well, and we need energy independence. And I want to tell you a quick story. Again, I live on a farm in Clark County, and we had a solar corporate company come to good.
You need to be close to the money. All right.
How's this? Great. We need money in politics. And then we had a corporate, a solar company come to my area. All right. And we need the transition to clean air, to clean energy. And what happened here is they came in as a bull in a china shop. And they went into our local community, throwing dollar signs around, but not really understanding what they were doing in terms of talking about people's ways of life, about talking about farmland that had been in people's families for generations and generations. And there was no real government support for what they were doing. And there was this huge county council meeting that had 3 times the amount of people that are here at it, just spilling out. And I stood up, for solar power and that we need clean energy, but I also stood up for the people that were there, saying that we need a federal government that will prioritize lands that aren't farmlands that put our solar power, whether that be highway dividers like they do in Asia, whether that be brownfields or on the top of garages like in the farmers market here. And so having that relationship to people and understanding the people that we need to gain trust from, while also standing up for science is possible. And that's one example of doing so. We need to translate that into larger policy in Congress.
Okay, well, relative to climate policy, my view is we are in a world of trouble. There's no way around it. I'm not going to tap dance around it. I used to work in emissions. I know the chemistry like the back of my hand, and it's scary out there. But it's just scary. Every time you turn around, there's a landslide, there's an earthquake, there's a tornado, hurricane, you name it. It's all happening. And it's deeply scary. And we talk about 2 years, 4 years. It's happening right now. So we need a JFK going to the moon in 10 years. That's what we need for climate change. 5 to 10 years, all fossil fuels, period. That's it. There's no way around it. We have to seriously look at fuel cells. Fuel cells have been around for a long time. They've been successfully deployed on, NASA's programs, right? They're very efficient. Obviously, they don't work in all applications, but the emissions is water, right? H2O, beautiful thing. We need to look at green hydrogen to fuel cells. And that's basically, you probably see all the, wind farms out in the water. They create green hydrogen, right? Or alternative, alternating current, right? So we need to look at that as a potential solution. We need to be heard from a vehicle perspective. We need to be really pushing electric vehicles. I know a lot of companies, push this for a long time, but they're not going away. Electric vehicles aren't going away. Everybody in Vermont knows that we need to get off hydrocarbons quickly. And we need to start looking at residential incentives, tax incentives for people to get off fossil fuels. I think really at the end of the day, it all comes back to money, right? When you start saving folks money, either in their gas bill, their electric bill, they're gonna be very interested in what you have to say. And they're gonna be very interested in signing up to all your legislation to make those actions happen. So as a legislator, I'd be at the forefront of making that happen, getting folks to sign up with me. And because I'm all about saving people money. But we need to be responsible. Obviously, there's some Department of Defense and national security exceptions that we have to adhere to as well. So there's a balanced approach. But we need a JFK style, 5 to 10 years, no fossil fuels. Thank you.
The federal government must play a central role in protecting air and water quality because pollution crosses state and local boundaries. Clean air and water are fundamental rights, not optional luxuries. I support strong environmental standards based on scientific evidence, not political considerations. That said, we can balance environmental protections with economic development through smart policies like providing technical assistance to help small businesses comply with regulations, creating market-based solutions that incentivize innovation, investing in green technologies that create jobs, and ensuring regulations are clear, consistent, and based on sound science. The legislative branch should establish clear environmental goals, provide adequate funding for implementation, while the executive branch should develop and enforce specific regulations based on scientific expertise. Both branches must work together to protect our environment while supporting sustainable economic growth.
This is the final general question. Among the most controversial environmental decisions of the current Trump administration is the abandonment of the 2009 endangerment finding, which establishes the role of greenhouse gases in climate change and requires the EPA to regulate CO2 emissions. What do you see as the impact of this action, and what do you see as the ideal role of the federal government to address the challenge of climate change?
Well, I said earlier that neutering the EPA and in particular the endangerment finding has been a goal for the big oil and gas company and the big polluters for years. Clearly, I understand that climate change is real and a threat to our world. And if elected, I will fight hard to restore the efforts to reduce CO2 emissions. I think we had made some good steps in the right direction. We had incentives for electric vehicles. We had incentives for using more renewables, and that's kind of all been put on hold and in some cases being rolled back. I would fight for the best of my abilities to fully fund the EPA and to isolate its mission from political influence. And I would certainly advocate the rejoining of the Paris Accords to climate change when we get a more rational administration in place in this country.
Climate change is real. We have a responsibility to address it. And we had some mechanisms and we tried to provide leadership, and every 4 years we had a switch and we backed out, and we've undercut our credibility in the world in leadership on this issue. That doesn't mean that we can't re-engage, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't re-engage. You know, one of the things that happened recently is they just repealed some of the legislation or some of the rules that made coal-fired power plants less attractive to run. And they're firing up coal-fired power plants. This is how far we've gotten. Coal-based energy is more expensive and pollutes, and they're advocating for it instead of cleaner, cheaper fuels. This is an ideological battle. This is not an economic battle at this point. And we have to understand that, and we have to change that. One thing that we need to do is realize that we have subsidized over the years. Every time we've had a change in our energy, we have, as a government, fostered that through government action. And we did that with fossil fuels. And now we're transitioning to something new. And those fossil fuel-based incentives need to be moved over to green energy. And this is where we need to go. And we need to move there energetically, to use a phrase, and aggressively.
Climate change is an emergency. We need action now, and we have an addiction to fossil fuels that we need to rid ourselves from. Again, there's way too much corporate money in everything that our government is doing, and we align ourselves with corporations instead of people. We lose trust. We lose on the issues, and the Democratic Party has not done a great job of getting that out of its party. And I think you got to start right here in Indiana 9 by making that commitment. In that process of changing over of our energy, in that process of changing over behaviors of how we have to act as a society, we can do that in such a way where we prioritize people or corporations. And if we just say, okay, we're going to keep the wealth gap the way it is, we're going to keep the power in the hands of those who are rulers in corporate world, then we're just going to have other companies putting in solar and hydroelectric and small nuclear or whatever it might be with the same wealth gap. this actually is a moment in time that is an opportunity for us to dovetail our desire to bring power back to people and our desire to clean up this environment. We need to do so by making sure that whatever government money goes to this goes to workers as much as it goes to corporations. And that is the basics of making sure that people get power back in their hands.
Okay, I want to veer on topic just for a second. If anybody challenges you on climate change, I want you to put that to our good friends, the actuary scientist who works for all the insurance companies. They're very good at numbers, and all you have to do is tell them, well, why aren't they insuring a lot of properties down in Florida on the coastline? Because if you go down there on the coastline, a lot of these communities, there's no insurance. Insurance companies won't insure property along the coastline. Okay, just a little side note. That's just something I deal with. People say there's no climate change. I point to the actuaries and they're like, okay, I'm good. Anyway, back to climate change. So something that's not talked a lot about is we call the circular economy. The circular economy is recycling. Bottles, glass, cans, and such. We need to expand that to building materials, concrete, steel, because it's been studied over time that concrete kicks off a lot of carbon dioxide if you pour concrete. So much so that it rivals the transportation system. So we need to look at developing policies that encourage not concrete or other alternative forms to build buildings that are equally or greater strength in terms of strength levels. And we need to look at tax policies that give tax credits for builders who do that. Because that is, I think I saw in the numbers upwards, 40 or 45% of total CO2 is from concrete building. Huge number. So we have to look at it as another problem we have and a potential solution that I think we can provide relative to dealing with the climate crisis. And then obviously, we have a lot of power in society on what we do with our dollars. Right? We can buy a gas engine or we can buy an electric vehicle. We can buy, invest in causes, for the stock market, for example. We can buy, certain stocks and bonds from a company that supports climate change, or we can buy from companies that support fossil fuels. We have a lot of power as consumers to directly impact climate policy by just watching where we spend our dollars. And I truly believe we just need to make the public aware of that. I think once people really realize where their dollars are going and how it's impacting the planet, I think that would change people's minds, because I'm deeply concerned about not only our future here on the table, but my kids' future, your kids' grandkids' future in this planet. And I would do everything as the 9th Congressional District to support those policies that make our economy stable, support our economy in terms of jobs, but at the same time, attack the climate crisis head on. Thank you.
Abandoning the endangerment finding is scientifically indefensible and dangerous. This decision undermines the EPA's ability to regulate greenhouse gases and delays critical climate action. I would support immediate legislation to codify the endangerment finding into law, making it harder to overturn administratively. Additionally, I propose a comprehensive climate action package, including carbon pricing, dividends returned to households, expanded tax credits for renewable energy development, infrastructure investments in climate resilience, and research funding for carbon capture and storage technologies. We should also rejoin the international climate agreements and take a leadership role in emissions reduction. The science is clear. We need bold action now to avoid catastrophic warming, and the economic costs of inaction far exceed the costs of mitigation.
Thank you all for answering the general questions. Before we begin the lightning round, I wanted to remind you all, if you have a question that you want to be submitted into the audience questions pool, please flag down Adela or Michael and send in your questions by the end of this lightning round. Reminder about the structure of this round, these are going to be shorter questions and you guys will each have about 45 seconds to answer. In the interest of time, I'm only going to ask 3 questions instead of 4 so that we can get to the audience questions a little bit sooner. And you guys can once again go in any order you like. This first question, one of the most controversial aspects of AI development has been the growing need for data centers, prominently within the state of Indiana, with very large demand on electricity and water resources. What do you see as the potential costs and benefits of these initiatives? And to what degree should local, state, or federal governments play a role in regulating data center development?
I think data center decisions should be primarily at the local level. However, I think in most cases, it's not a good bet for those communities. As you said, they use huge amounts of electricity, often pollute the water, and the job creations. There's construction jobs initially, but long range is usually like in the single digits. So you don't get a good economic return to the community.
I'm against irresponsible implementation of data centers. That doesn't mean I'm against data centers. It means I'm against irresponsible. And we need to define what is responsible. What does good look like? What does responsible in the community look like? And then we need to ensure that there is an open process so that you can't have somebody come in and say, hey, I want to start a data center, but let's have a secret meeting. Let's have secret agreements. Let's keep this away from the people so that they can make decisions about their own communities. That is unethical and that's inappropriate. We need to prevent that.
Yeah, transparency is key here when building data centers. Communities don't find out about them until after contracts are made. At the same time as we need to do regulate at the federal level, actually, to make sure that as these companies are creating data center, that they are dealing with their water needs responsibly and that all of their electricity needs are generated by themselves. Our grid can't handle these data centers growing at this pace that they think they need to. And I have a data center going up in our backyard, almost our backyard, and they are building their own transformer there. So I feel like that was responsible by them. It's Facebook, but they aren't very responsible with water right now. So we do need the federal regulations to make them act appropriately.
Yeah, so we definitely, relative to data centers, we need value proposition for communities. It's that simple. What's the community going to get out of the deal? Are they going to get a 5 or 10 year or 20-year revenue stream from that company? We also need transparency, right? So back to the value proposition. Years ago, when an assembly plant came in from GM with Ford, right, you'd see 5 or 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. We need the same thing from data center. We also need responsible regulations, right? Environmental regulations that deal with water and electricity, like we talked about. Those are some things, some positive things I can say. They do create jobs. And another thing that's going on around the world is we have to deal with this from a national security standpoint. I know we've been talking a lot about this, but China's doing what Russia's doing. And I was a Navy officer for 11 years. I'm acutely aware of some security issues. And we have to keep up with technology. We can't let China or Russia beat us on the technology front, right? Because if they attack us, we need to be able to deal with them effectively. And so we need responsible data center deployment, but we can't stop it. I mean, we have to be able to do it in a responsible, very responsible way.
Yeah, I've actually written draft legislation on this exact issue. Data centers need to be clean, they need to be efficient, and they need to provide benefit for the local economy. For the people who live there, they have to provide their own infrastructure and provide support for the community. They should provide jobs, they should provide money, and provide all of the infrastructure needs of the data center. And I've written draft legislation to address exactly that issue.
Thank you all. The second question, what do you see as the role of the federal government to ensure high quality reproductive health care for all Americans?
And that's a very loaded question because you get very strong feelings on both sides of the aisle. The reality of the state, the reality of the situation right now is based on the Dobbs decision. That's at the state level. They make those decisions. And I think basically at some point in time, if a constitutional amendment were brought forward, I would seriously and prayerfully consider it. It's a tough decision.
Test. Oh, we're live again. Wonderful. Oh, so I believe that we need to restore Roe v. Wade. Full stop. Right? This is something we need to work for. There are serious challenges because of the way the Supreme Court did the ruling, which they passed it back as much as they could to the states, and we need to try to work against that. We need to try to get a federal law in place. One of the things that I am advocating for is a constitutional right to health care, and we can include that as part of it. We can include the right to freedom of choice as part of a healthcare thing. One of the things that we don't talk about very much, we spend a lot of time talking about Roe v. Wade and choice, but also Planned Parenthood and contraceptives is under attack in this country. And you know, when my wife and I were first married and we were living poor, we used Planned Parenthood. They provide a lot of important services to the community, and I don't think that they get the support and advocacy that they need. So I wanted to include that. Thank you.
Again, I'm an emergency physician coming off a night shift last night. And what's it called? I tried to find it up here. I'm an emergency physician, and even this week, it happens all the time. I've treated a lot of women who've been raped, and girls who've been raped. And never once, when giving my counsel, having those conversations, did I ever consider what the government had to say before these laws came down, the Supreme Court decision came down. The government just does not belong in my exam room, and healthcare is a human right. It is not, unfortunately, a constitutional right. But through privacy laws, through working to keep the government out of our exam room, whether that means abortion rights, whether that means vaccination rights, whether that means having our ability to make medical decisions through AI versus doctors, whether that means having insurance companies get out of our exam room when it comes to prior authorization. How is that legal? It shouldn't be. It will be illegal if you elect me to Congress. The answer here is remove the government from the exam room and we will be able to get on.
Yes, I'd be in favor of reinstating Roe, of course. I'd also be in favor of a constitutional amendment if we could ever get it passed. And then obviously, I would definitely support funding for Planned Parenthood, any and all those services for women to support women. I'm for women's choice, so I truly believe in funding and supporting whatever women need in that regard. Thank you.
Yeah, I actually wrote healthcare legislation, and so on my website. It specifically defines reproductive healthcare as healthcare and denial-free. So that's my answer. All healthcare, all reproductive healthcare is just healthcare, and you should get it without question.
For our last question, should the federal government play a role in supporting or subsidizing energy initiatives to support U.S. energy independence and economic leadership?
Well, it seems like we've been trying to do that for a while. I guess we actually do produce more oil than we consume, but there's actually an issue with the refineries. We can't refine all the oil that we produce in various parts of our country. So we end up having to ship that out and then bring oil back in from other places. We really need an overall US energy plan. Somebody mentioned a space yacht type program to try to bring our energy into the 21st century with heavy emphasis on renewables, declining emphasis on fossil fuel. All of those are things I think all of us would try for. It's going to be difficult.
The United States government was involved in supporting, which probably is a bad thing to say in this room, but we supported whaling when that's where we got a lot of our energy from. We supported the transition to coal. Then we supported the transition to oil, and then we're supporting the transition to natural gas. And now we're going to be supporting, and we have been supporting to renewable. This is not a new thing. This is something that we have done for a couple hundred years, right? So this is a core responsibility of the government for the federal government to look at what our energy policy is, what makes sense at 1 year from now, what makes sense 10 years from now, and what makes sense 100 years from now. And how do we get to that point? And if we're going to transition sometime in the next 100 years to a better, cleaner energy, how do we do that quicker instead of slower? We need to be at the leading edge. That is the purpose of the government, is to work on big things, especially when initially they are not profitable and eventually they become profitable, like solar and like wind was.
The big beautiful bill is an abomination. A lot of people think of it as a healthcare bill, but tax bill. It's also an energy bill where pretty much every incentive you had to get clean energy has been rolled back. And we have incentivized people to invest in fossil fuels by really manipulating the capital gains tax. And so that needs to be torpedoed, using your whale analogy immediately. And I just want to say one thing, this is a moment, this is an emergency, but it's a climate change, but this is a moment that we can actually bring people together, knock down thousands of doors. People are mad about gasoline prices right now. And it does not matter if you are a Republican or an independent or a Democrat. We don't get unity like this in many things. And so this election becomes an opportunity to get into office and bring some people together.
So yeah, my first step in office would be to repeal and replace the big, beautiful disaster of a bill. It's that simple. It's an abomination. So anyway, back to energy. Solar panels seem to be working. Solar panels, years ago, they were like, oh, that's a pipe dream. It's not cost effective. It's not efficient. But actually, they're starting to shut down some nuclear power plants because how cost effective and how efficient solar panels are. So that's amazing how the market is working. If we continue to do that, that's a clean energy policy that is effective, and that's actually saving folks money because there's tax credits. Well, there was tax credits, now, they stopped them. So, as a House representative, a newly elected official, I would obviously advocate to have those reinstated. It'd be really hard the first 2 years, of course, until we get a new president, but obviously I'd advocate for those. And we need to continue to look at other recycling policies. I talked earlier about the circular economy and other alternative fuels. We need to continue to do that. And I also talked, by the way, Jim, it was me talking about JFK, named him that was me, Jim. Yeah, but we need a JFK style man to the moon in 10 years with the climate change. No kidding. Has to happen quickly. You see the markers all over the planet, right? The global temperature keeps going up and up and up, which it's not going down, unfortunately. So anyway, that's kind of my policies on energy independence. And we need to continue to advocate and basically cancel what the Trump administration is doing and reinstitute those policies so we can get an active and have them really supercharge the industrial base to encourage financially people to buy that product so we can limit the CO2 methane gas emissions. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm pro wind, pro solar, and pro new nuclear. Those molten salt reactors are the bee's knees. I mean, I would have one in my backyard if I could. I mean, 3,000 kilowatts a month. So nuclear is about the only way I can go. Thanks.
All right, now we're moving on to audience questions, and Tyler's going to take this segment.
All right, yeah, thank you all for your answers. So we got a lot of audience questions here. Now, we're not going to be able to get to all of those. So again, I'll remind you, we'd love to see some of you at Lenny's afterwards if you have further questions. So let's actually reverse order here. So we'll start with you, Floyd, this first one. Thousands of people throughout the country are concerned about the unregulated explosion of AI and the accompanying data centers that gobble energy and water. Would you support a moratorium on data centers to allow appropriate policy to be developed?
I can't really support moratorium on data centers or AI. No other country will be doing it, and it would just put us behind to do it ourselves. We need to do some responsible funding, responsible research, and responsible development. But total moratorium would just put us in the back seat to everybody else.
Yeah, I would be hesitant to institute a full moratorium because of the national security implications, right? China and the other countries are doing the same thing. But like I said earlier, we need to have responsible environmental policies. We need to have a clear value proposition for that community. And when I mean value proposition, I want to see tax revenues going into that community, roads, bridges, schools, additional funding to support that community if they're putting in a data center in the backyard. And then we also have to have transparency, of course. We can't have a shadowy company come in, build a data center, and nobody knows who the company is, where the materials are coming from. So that's kind of my position on AI moratorium.
You can't build a data center unless you comply to our environmental regulations for electricity, to our local community needs. That should be the law. That will be the law that I would pass. So in that way, if you want to call that a moratorium, great, but I'm pretty sure that Google, Facebook, whomever can do that immediately and still build a building and still build their data centers. So moratorium with regulations.
We should immediately pass legislation that requires transparency. That's the first thing. Let's start with getting transparency. And then we also need to engage the EPA, and then we need to fund the EPA so that they can do proper enforcement. So there's things that we can do now that we're not. And one of the reasons is that what they've done is they write a law, and then the EPA comes up with policy and implementation. And through recent Supreme Court, they said, no, you've got to go off of the law. You can't go off of the regulations, which means that it's pushed it back into the responsibility of Congress to act. And that's not an excuse for us not to act. That's why I want to get into Congress, because we need to write legislation that actually addresses these quickly. And we should be able to do that as quickly as we can get a law passed that would be a moratorium.
I've spoken earlier about data centers, so I will address the AI situation. I think we should all be aware that because of the nature of these deep artificial neural networks, there are two key technical shortcomings The first is that unlike the earlier rule-based systems that they had some years ago, these new systems can in general explain how they do their reasoning. They're just interconnected networks, and they've done iterative adjustment of the weights until they reach a stability point, and then they give it a prompt and a result is created, and they can't explain it. And the even more scary thing is, probably all aware of it, sometimes they just simply make things up. Facts and citations and everything else. They cheerfully refer to that as hallucinations. And then they say, well, we should use this for medicine, and we should use this for, this and that, and then for military applications. That's ludicrous. Obviously, that we need some guardrails on the development, deployment of AI. We need guardrails about children being exposed to chatbots. And beyond that, my opinion is that strict liability law should apply. If someone is injured as a result of AI, the company that developed that should pay for it and should be accountable. You have a bunch of good lawyers in Bloomington and lots of other places that would hold these people, and they might think twice about some of the things that they would release.
Thank you. So for our second one, we're going to start with you, Floyd. What will be the first bill you will introduce in the 2027-2028 Congress?
That's a good question, because I have an app that helps Congress out, and where all my constituents get to vote on which bills they like, and I've written like 26 of them. And so whichever ones my constituents decide they want me to push first, is what I push first. I don't have a personal priority.
All right, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about me. So, a couple of jobs ago, I was sitting at a desk and I was trying to figure out this complicated engineering problem. And I was sitting there and I was thinking, man, it's gonna take 2 hours. And then a friend of mine said, just go to the guy next to you, like literally 5 feet away, and ask him to tell you in that 3 seconds. So I go to meet him, 3 seconds. So I guess that's my answer. I'm all about efficiency. I want things done quickly. First answer is ACA subsidies. I think that can happen quickly. So I'm all about getting that done because that can happen quickly. Like literally probably in the first session of Congress, assuming the Democratic Party takes over. I believe the legislation is already there. It's just turning key. Thank you.
Our healthcare system come January 1st, 2027 is under threat of collapsing. The ACA subsidies are going to have millions of people be on insurance, but so is the Medicaid rollbacks. There will be another 10 million or so coming off in the next 10 years. And then Medicare rates are not going up with inflation. And all of this needs to be fixed immediately, because we are going to move into, on day one, a system when we take the office on day one, the same day, all of these things will start to be cut in very deeply. So that is the emergency that we will have on our hands that we need to address. So before going to, yes, healthcare is a human right, we need everybody to have healthcare. We need to roll back all of these big, beautiful bill cuts that happened. Otherwise, we're going to lose our hospitals, and we'll lose hospital services, and your hospital here will be even more busy than it already is.
Come check. Good, it works. Okay, so we have number 2 in my night of agreeing with Dr. Peck. And that is repealing the big bad beautiful bill is really important. After that, impeachment and removal for the Iran war. I'm done.
You're done.
You asked me what number 1 was, and I snuck in number 1 and number 2, and I didn't want to press my luck and go for number 3. I don't want to get in trouble.
I think tonight, if nothing else, there's so many things that need to be repaired. It's going to take the next Congress and the Congress after that, and maybe some more. But for me, the first legislation that I would push for is to restore the cuts to veterans programs and veterans hospitals. Those people put their lives on the line, and we owe it to them morally to take care of them.
I think we got time for one more. Okay. What is your view of nuclear power development in India?
I haven't reviewed any of the current nuclear power development in Indiana. I'm 100% pro nuclear. I think it can be great if done properly. We're not going to put any carbon reactors or no Chernobyl, no 3 Mile Island. But a nice molten salt reactor would be nice. Other than that, I'm not aware of it. I mean, I've heard of it, but I don't have anything to say about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a lot about the local regulatory issues right now with nuclear fission, but if what I've heard is correct, I'm hearing they're very efficient, and they're very very efficient and put out a lot of electricity. But there's a lot of concerns with the regulatory and environmental impacts, the cost and everything. One good thing about nuclear is like no emissions, right? Other than you have to deal with the cement rods and such. So that has to be dealt with efficiently, like it has been done in the past. And to be honest, like a good engineer, I don't know all the answers. I will find them. Thank you.
We have
Your life.
we have a very interesting new pressure on nuclear to accelerate the technology to make it smaller and even portable, which is we are going to the moon. We are going to put a base on the south pole of the moon, which doesn't get much light. The reason is that's where the water is. And because of that, we need small nuclear reactors that can go on a spaceship and then land on the moon, etc. That's going to accelerate the technology greatly. So I think instead of looking at large nuclear reactors, we should be pushing on this technology to go small and safer and get it to the point where, thank you, get it to the point where we are all having nuclear be much more efficient.
I wish I could support nuclear. I really do. I would love to be a nuclear supporter, and I'm not. My feeling is, if you want to put a nuclear reactor on the moon, that is an excellent place for it. Okay. And here's my issue. In order, as Kyle said, as an engineer, I want to know the facts. I want to know how it works. I want to know, what the issues and what the control surfaces are and all these details. And corporations are going to say, we've got it. This is what it is. And then we're going to have to rely on the government to do that analysis, to make sure that they've covered it, to make sure that they implement it as they said, to test the edge cases. Because when nuclear goes wrong, it goes really wrong. Okay. And if you look at the accidents, they're not one thing that happened that you look at it and the engineer goes, oh yeah, I should have thought of that. It's 5 or 6 things, and the engineers look at it and go, crap, I never would have thought that happened. If we don't have a strong federal government that can really do its job to make sure that it's safe, then I can't trust the analysis, and therefore the only place I want that stuff to be is on the moon.
Like all technologies, there are benefits and there are risks. And I think with the small nuclear reactors, they certainly sound promising. A number of them being built across the country. We'll have some test data before we get pretty soon, Brad. So,
Tell me again in 30 years how it worked.
I just rebutted because of the mood thing, but I understand you're making light of it, but
No, I'm not making light of it. I'm pretty good with it on the moon.
Technology advancements that we've had in this country and this world because of space travel that makes up much of the technology that we have. I would give it a chance to see what's coming up this. It's going to be incredible pressures on people to come up with new technologies. And if we don't at least embrace the possibility to get energy independence, to save the world of its climate disaster, then we're playing with one arm behind our back.
Well, on a
Rebuttal, if I may.
Sure.
Sorry. So NASA's funding is, they're going to cut it by 47%. So they're going to be doing their work on a shoestring. I agree 100%. I want to be for nuclear. It's not that I'm against nuclear. It's that I can't trust the government to do its job when it's politically motivated, when we've got people that think that they can inject bleach and make things go away. Okay, when we don't have credibility, when we don't have the trust in the government to do their job, when they're captive to industry, we can't rely on the science because the science is being undercut. That's my issue. I want it to work. I want us to develop it, but it has to be done responsibly. It has to be done safely. It has to be done with oversight that we can trust. And I cannot trust this administration and what they've been doing.
All right, thank you. Well, that concludes our question period. So now we'll move to some brief closing statements from each one of you. Floyd, we'll go ahead and start with you again.
Science just isn't a body of knowledge. It's our best method for understanding the world and solving problems. As your representative, I'll bring my technical background and practical experience to every policy decision, ensuring we're guided by evidence rather than ideology. We face complex challenges, and that demands scientific solutions, from climate change to public health to technological disruption. And let's be honest, sometimes looking at our government, it feels strange, like strange things are afoot at the Circle K. But we don't panic, we get to work. By restoring scientific integrity of government, investing in research and development, and supporting our scientific workforce, we can build a healthier, more prosperous future. I'm committed to making decisions based on facts, data, and rigorous analysis, because that's what works. Thank you.
Sure. I don't know if most of you are aware, but STEM professionals in Congress are definitely okay. Most of the lawyers are not STEM related. So we need a candidate who can explain things around policy and economics. Economics and policy have to go hand in hand, because the reality is as a representative, we're going to be trying to sell and communicate why this policy improves economics from a governmental standpoint. How are we going to be able to bring in higher tax revenues? How are we going to be able to create jobs, right? It really all comes back to economics and dollars. So we have to create STEM policies that drive that home. I believe I'm the candidate that can effectively do that with a cross-functional groups. I spent 11 years in the Navy. I used to deal with 200-300 folks in my companions. The production supervisor, I used to deal with many folks in different communities. And I have that experience and breadth and background to be able to communicate and work with people in different backgrounds and build those relationships and agree to disagree, because you're going to come across folks that you just, quite frankly, you have to disagree with. But at the same time, you have to be able to talk to them at a human level, ask them about their family, ask them about how they're doing, and learn to agree to disagree by being civil. Because if you build relationships, if you know how to build relationships in this job, you will be successful. People will come up to you and help you support your legislation when you didn't think would show up. And that's what the job is. So it's relationship building, it's a leadership, it's a being able to deal with folks from all across the country and to get them on board with your legislation. You have to have those people skills, you have to have that empathy, and you have to have that human contact. Ask them how they're doing, how their family's doing. Get to know them. Because that's how you build those relationships. That's how you can get things done for our community. My name's Kyle Rourke. I appreciate it if you just go to kylerourke.com and appreciate your vote. Thank you.
I think we've seen from a lot of these questions here that science is one of the answers to save the world. It's to save our environment, and save so many things. And I spent my career translating science into real life, whether that be by the bedside to policymakers. I spent years in DC doing bipartisan legislation to make telemedicine a reality, and with the public in Southern Indiana. So I'd say about Indiana 9, it's a microcosm of America right here when it comes to science. It's pretty incredible. We have this world-class research institution that we're sitting in right alongside a rural community. And in that rural community, just like rural communities across the United States, skepticism is real, and our future does depend on the translation to those people of what's happening. So this line of communication of what's happening here in Bloomington to those people in Bedford, but then back to the people in DC who support the actual research and policy to make the people here in Bloomington actually be able to do their work. That circle is broken right now because trust is broken. And we need leadership that can bridge that world between facts and belief. And that's the work I've done, it's the work I'm ready to do. And if you have your trust in me, your vote this May 5th, I will bring that work to DC. Thank you so much.
This planet is not our inheritance. This planet was given to us in trust from our parents to give to their grandchildren. It's what we pass down. It's not something that we use up so that it's all used up the day after we die. It's something that we have a responsibility to future generations and to ourselves. And economics is always, there's always this pull between economics and the environment, and what are we going to do? And the answer is always, unfortunately, economics, right? Our environment loses so often in that tug of war. And one of the things that's really nice about science is it begins to give us answers to how we can balance that better and how we can move forward and optimize those two things that people are trying to keep an eye on. It is our future. It is at risk. It is being undermined. And that's why I want to go to Congress to fight for this. You know, when I talk about fighting, I'm not talking about, duking it out or having a knife fight. Sorry, for those of you that weren't in the other, he sometimes references knife fights, so that was not a threat. So don't anybody get triggered. But it's about standing our ground and saying, these are our values, these are our priorities, and helping people understand why we see this and understand why it's in their best interest. It is about relationships. It is about trust. But that doesn't mean that we have to lose ourselves and blend in with the people that are causing this mess. It just means that we can disagree without being disagreeable. We need to stand up for what we believe in. Thank you.
Yeah, the actual quote, Brad, was that we're in a street fight for our democracy, and I can handle a street fight. As I said in my opening, I've been a science guy all my life. If elected, I would put a high priority in trying to bring back rational problem solving, and particularly looking for compromises that lead to win-win solutions. They're out there. We just need to apply ourselves to do that. I would certainly do my best to try to bring back the independence of the National Science Foundation and maintain its funding. I would do my very best to fully fund the EPA and isolate it from political influence. The other thing I think is that I have the technical background, including a PhD in the science area, applied science. And I think I'm very capable of analyzing the new technical challenges that we face in things like artificial intelligence, small nuclear reactors, and cybersecurity. I've been through the rounds of actually writing proposals to the National Science Foundation, to DARPA and other places. I know how that science works. I know how important that is. I would appreciate your vote on May the 5th. Thank you.
Thank you all. I'll hand it over to Michael now for the closing remarks.
No real remarks. I just want to thank our candidates for doing a beautiful job here. Everybody at the library has helped us set this up. And big kudos to the leaders of Advocates for Something. I want to remind you that we have got to be out of this building in 7 minutes, but the good news is, if you're willing, I don't know how many of you can join us, but we have a few tables reserved upstairs at Lenny's, out the front door, down a block and a half to the left, just before the sample gates, and we can continue some conversation. And also, we're going to invite all the candidates, including Representative Houston, to submit answers like in writing. As a follow-up. Okay, thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here.